Good morning, everybody. This is Mr. Hammer. I'm here to welcome you to my math class. Today we're going to be covering beginning of chapter 8. We're going to be talking about fractions and we're going to be talking about percents. When we talk about working with percents, we're talking about how we're going to relate decimals to fractions and percents and how we can go from one to the other and back again. We're going to solve problems that involve fractions, decimals, and percents. You'll eventually be multiplying decimals and dividing decimals. Why it is important is pretty simple. In this day and age, you're buying things, you're paying tax. Tax is 13% if you're in Canada, and that is multiplying by a decimal. Stores offer goods on sale to encourage you to spend money. What is the sale price of each item? How did you calculate that sale price? And what do you need to add to find the price you pay? So you'll get running shoes for $150, skis for $200, half price and everything. Being able to convert from percent to decimals is going to help you figure out what 30% or 50% really means like in a dollar amount. Let's go to the next section. So skills you need. The first thing is there's a few skills you're going to be needing. Number one, how can you write a fraction as a decimal? And we're going to go through a couple examples. And then we're going to talk about percent. So skill number one, to write a fraction as a decimal, you need to try to write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. When we cannot write an equivalent fraction, we then would use a calculator to divide. Now there are some conversions from fractions to decimals that are worth remembering, and these are the ones you want to remember. So first of all, we mostly know that 1/2, 1 over 2 equals 0.5. 1/4, 1 over 4 equals 0.25. 1 over 5, otherwise known as 1/5, is equal to 0.2. 1 over 8, and we can actually say 1/8, is equal to 0.125. One that we often hear is 1 over 10, and that's equal to 0.1. And 1 over 100 is 0.01. Now you can use these conversions to write other fractions as decimals. So for example, because you know 1 over 10 equals 0.1, 2 over 10 is going to equal 0.2. 3 over 10 will be 0.3. So for example, in the same way, since 1 over 100 equals 0.01, we could say that 60 over 100 equals 0.60. That's a useful tip as you're going along. Let's go to example number one. I'm going to change my pen here, make it a little thinner. Here we go. Convert each fraction to a decimal. We're going to start with 3 over 5. So if you have 3 over 5, the first question you want to ask yourself is, can we convert 5 easily to 100? Because what we're going to do is we want to convert 3 over 5 into an equivalent fraction that is over 100. And we know that 5 times 20 is going to give us 100. Now in equivalent fractions, we have to multiply the denominator, which is our bottom number, by the same number that we multiply the numerator by, and the numerator is our top number on the fraction. So we're also going to multiply 3 times 20, and that will give us 60. So we know that now 3 over 5 is equal to 60 over 100. And as we looked at just in the section before, we know that equals 0.60. Now let's look at the next question, 7 over 8. Going to scroll down just a little bit. 7 over 8. The first thing we want to do is see if we can easily multiply a number by 8 to turn it into 100. And since we can't, we're going to need to take our calculator. So I'm going to do 7 divided by 8 on my calculator, and I get an answer of 0.875. So there's two ways you are going to work to find and convert a fraction to a decimal. If you can convert and change the denominator into a number that multiplies up to 100, if you can multiply a number by the denominator to get 100, you would multiply the numerator, the top number, by that same number, and then you have your number over 100. And quite simply, you take that number and you convert it into your decimal. It's always going to be 2 digits to the left that you will put a decimal right over there. If the number, the denominator number, cannot be divided by 100, or there's no number that will multiply cleanly to get you to 100, you would simply use your calculator, which is what we did in this case. Now we'll move to number 1. I'm going to give an example number 1. We can look at this one here. We're going to take 3 over 4. We're going to recognize that 4 multiplied by 25 will give us 100. We'll put that over there, and we're going to also multiply my numerator then by 25, which will give us 75. And therefore we will have 0.75 as our fraction, as our decimal rather. Now let's go into number 2. We'll do 5 over 8. Well, we're stuck in the same situation as last, where I can't do that. I can't multiply any number by 8, whole number by 8, to give us 100. So we're going to simply do 5 divided by 8 on my calculator, and I will get 0.625. And that is skill number 1, converting fractionals into decimals. Now skill number 2 is talking about percents. Now the word percent, if you break it up into 2 words, you have per and cent. Per means for, and cent in French means 100. So for every 100. So it literally means per 100. Now we talk about one whole, or the number 1, is actually equal to 100%. So we can think of something like pizza. The bottom number of our fraction is always going to be the total number of whatever it is we are counting. In this case, we're counting slices. Now, if I was quite hungry and I ate all 10 slices, I would put the 10 on the top. And that would mean, essentially, that I ate one whole pizza, the whole pizza with 10 slices. And that is equivalent to 100%. Now 1 is always equal to 100%. We can take any number here, and as long as we divide it by itself, is always going to equal to 1, and therefore it's always going to equal to 100. So for example, we could do 67 divided by 67. That will always equal to 1, which will always equal to 100%. That's just an important side note to note, that any number divided by itself is 1, and 1 is always equal to 100%. You can think of this. If I had 67 apples and I gave all 67 of them away, I gave away 100% of my apples. Now, basically over here, what are we talking about here? We have 70 over 100. When you have a number over 100, it's really, really easy to figure out the percent. The number that is on top of 100 is the percent. So 70 over 100 is 70%. 4 over 100 is 4%. 100 over 100 is 100%. 27 over 100 is 27%. You can think of it that if the number is over 100, that there is a silent, I'm going to draw it in yellow, there is a silent percent mark beside that number. And so you know it can equal to whatever that number is as a percent. And as a side note, you can have numbers that are larger. You could have situations, for example, where you have 250 over 100. And according to the same rule, that number in the numerator would be your percent. So 250 over 100 is equal to 250%. This could be a situation of a stock market. If the stock is worth a certain amount of money and it goes up, stocks can double or triple in value. This means the stock went up 2.5 times what it was worth. I already did this example, so I think I'm going to have to erase it quickly. There we go. So here's our example number 2 for percent. We look at this shaded chart over here, and we want to figure out what percent of the hundreds chart is shaded each color. So we're going to start with red, then blue, then yellow. Now when we look at the chart, we need to find out what are the total number of squares here. And you can see it's a 10 by 10 grid, so we know that there are 100 squares. And when we're talking about the red, which is why I'm using the red ink, we're going to simply count up the red squares. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I have 11 squares over 100 are red. Therefore, 11% of these squares are red. Now let's do the blue. So for the blue, we again know it's over 100. We're going to count these squares. Instead of counting them all, I'm going to realize here I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. So I have 55 total squares, which means, again, according to my rule, that means 55% of the squares are blue. And finally, yellow. So we know, again, our total number of squares are 100. We're going to count 10, 20, 30 squares here in these rows, plus 1, 2, 3, 4. So 34 over 100, or 34% of our squares are yellow. One thing about percent, if our, whatever the different categories are that fill our percents here, cover the whole amount, cover the whole 100, the percents should add up to 100. So in this case, adding the blue, the red, and the yellow fills up our 100 squares. So we can try it. Let's add 11 plus 55 plus 34, and I get 100%. And so that means I know I've done this correctly. There are two questions here, I believe. Question number 3, where you'll shade 15% red, 26% yellow, 43% green, 10% blue. And then there's one more question here, 4, which is asking you which percent is not shaded. So that's been an introduction to looking at percents, decimals, and fractions, giving you the skills you need to move on to section 8.1, which will be in the next video.